Well, as Chris Yillman explained, compromise remains elusive on the asylum seeker issue. And to discuss that, I'm joined now from Canberra by the Shadow Immigration Minister, Scott Morrison. Mr Morrison, Julia Gillard said today that she's open to discussions with the opposition on this issue to reach a compromise. Is the opposition open to it?
The Prime Minister's position and the Minister's position hasn't changed since where we were last December. She made that pretty clear today. What's before us is a piece of legislation, Lee, and that legislation hasn't changed one line, one sentence since it was first proposed. We've been very clear about our problems with that legislation, and the government hasn't sought to make any changes to that legislation. But
negotiations on difficult issues are often fractious and take time. She has at least said today that she is prepared to sit down and to keep talking about it and try to work it through. Is the opposition prepared to meet her on that?
Well, the Australian people want decisions and they want action. I don't think they want more talk on this. What they want is a government to govern and to take decisions based on the measures that they have available to them through the Parliament. Now, this Prime Minister has said before on other issues like the carbon tax that she wants to find another way to getting to a destination. Well, on this one, she simply said, no, that's our position. It hasn't changed since last December. And as a result, then it's not surprising that nothing's moved on.
Is there anything that would make Malaysia a viable option for the coalition? Anything at all?
Well, almost 8,000 people have turned up for an 800 cap arrangement since it was announced just over a year ago. More than 800 people turned up in the first 2 weeks of this year. We've made it very clear that the cap is a very big problem with this policy. We've made it very clear that the absence of any legally binding protections, either in the government's legislation or the arrangement they've struck with Malaysia, is a problem.
Okay,
we've made it very clear.
I'm trying to get an answer to my question, which is there anything that would make Malaysia viable? Are you saying then that if there were legally binding protections, if there wasn't a cap, would that help make it viable? That's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
Well, I understand what you're trying to get to, Lee, and I'm trying to answer your question. There was another problem that there was with this proposal, and that was it didn't apply to everyone who came, and as a result it created exceptions, and interestingly those exceptions would be most likely for children and families. Now, I've been highlighting these problems with the Malaysia proposal for over a year, and the government has dismissed them on every single occasion. I've been highlighting the problems with the legislation they've sought to put before the Parliament, and they've dismissed them on every occasion. What we have here, Lee, is a failure of government policy, not of opposition policy. The opposition policy worked, it was abolished, and the government is now seeking to put aside culpability for their policy failures rather than address them.
Okay. The government's job is to govern, the opposition's is to oppose, sure, but you are all elected as individual members of Parliament by voters who expect you to get things done. Is the coalition's determination to not give an inch on this really what the public expects? Some of your own backbenchers don't seem to think so.
Well, we will stand by the policies we've held for a decade, Lee. We believe strongly in our policies, and I can guarantee you that the coalition will stand strongly by those policies if we're elected to government. And the people who understand that best, Lee, are the people smugglers themselves. They understand consistency of a position. They understand strength of a position. I said this morning in an article in The Australian that this government has become incapable, I think, of delivering any solution because they have lost all credibility on this issue.
Okay.
You need to have the resolve and the substance behind measures. And what's important is that you get the right policy and you get the right measures in place.
Well, let's talk about a potential way forward. Let's talk about a potential way forward. If Labor puts up a package that is what you've asked, they drop Malaysia, they embrace Nauru and TPVs, do you guarantee that the coalition will support it?
None of that has happened, Lee.
No, but I'm asking if they came to you with that.
Well, I'm not negotiating with you or having this discussion with you. If there was a discussion, it would be with the government.
But
there is no discussion, Lee.
This is not going to be resolved unless the coalition comes up with a position that you would be happy with. Well, you could pick up the phone to them if you really wanted it resolved.
No, Lee, the government knows our position, as I made very clear this morning. They've known our position for over a year. Lee, I've been talking about this issue, as you know, for years.
I know you have.
3 years ago, I started talking about this issue, and it was a very lonely place.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm trying to get to the bottom of exactly what the coalition would accept here. I'm asking if the government put up exactly what you want, would you support it?
Well, Lee, that hasn't happened. The government has shown no indication at any occasion when I've addressed any of these matters in the past to address any element of them.
But if you can't even agree that you would support your own policy if they put it to you, then, you know, where are we?
What I've said very clearly all along, Lee, is that we've made our position on the Malaysian people swap, which is an abominable arrangement, very, very clear. We've made our position on the legislation very clear. Now, let's be very clear about the legislation that they want this parliament to pass. They are abolishing Section 198A of the Migration Act, which was inserted by the Coalition to provide human rights protections for people transferred to a third country for offshore processing. They have abolished that in this bill, and they have refused to replace it with something that is legally binding. And that's not only true for the government's bill, it's also true for Mr Oakeshott's bill. Now, that's not a bill, Lee, that I am going to recommend that we should pass. I've made that very clear to the government, and their response has been to not change one word.
What do you say to the suggestion that the Coalition doesn't want this issue resolved because it's one of the main areas for you to make political mileage against the government?
I think it's a very offensive and cynical assertion to put forward, particularly to someone who has been arguing the case that we need to avoid the tragedies we've seen in recent times for years and years. And when I first put that forward in the public forum, then I was in a very lonely place. No one was agreeing with the Coalition at that time except a handful of people. Now there is a chorus of people wanting to lecture the Coalition on illegal maritime arrivals. Now, I find that a very strange situation to be in, given we have been only consistent and strong on this matter, and with the resolve the Australian people respect. Now, we're going to stand by that position, Lee, and the people smugglers know it, and that is why I believe we'll be successful if we're elected to government in stopping this mess. If
Labor were to implement your policy in its entirety, would the Coalition accept equal responsibility for its results?
Well, as I said today, what you have to have is good policy and people who know how to implement it and who have the character and resolve to back up the measures they're putting in place. I think this government is now a position, as I said in my article today, where they think they have very little credibility, if any, to deliver anything.
But the problem is not just the measures. Would you stand by it?
No, what I'm saying, Lee, the problem now is just not their policies and what they do, it's them themselves. This government is the pull factor. They are actually the problem. And they have no credibility now out there, I think, to pull virtually any measure off. Now, I have very great confidence that if Tony Abbott and I were given the opportunity, if we're elected, that these measures would be absolutely successful, as they were last time when John Howard, Philip Ruddock and Alexander Downer constructed the arrangements we had last time and put them into place. Well, I have great confidence in that.
I will look very forward to testing you on that maybe some point in the future. Scott Morrison, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Lee.